On the 19th of March 1914, 100 years ago, the New Zealand Society of Civil Engineers was created. Over the following 100 years, that society's changed, evolved, and has become IPENS. In its evolution, it has embraced more than just civil engineering. It now embraces all forms of professional engineering. As part of the centenary event celebrating the fact that we've survived 100 years and looking forward to the next 100, we're running a series of panel discussions, of which this is the fourth in the series. The panel discussion tonight, as you're aware, is cyber security, digital dangers, as you'll see at the front there, and it coincides with Connect Smart Week. So Connect Smart is a government initiative that I'm sure you're going to hear more about in the panel discussion tonight. But IPENS is a proud supporter and partner of that initiative. Anyway, the panel discussion will take place, and there'll be an opportunity at the end for questions to be asked. But without further ado, just introduce or recognise Simon as the panel moderator and ask you to give a warm welcome to him and the panel.
Kia ora, good evening and welcome to the IPENS Technology Challenging Society series, and today, Digital Dangers Exposing Cybercrime in New Zealand. I am Simon Morton, I'm the host of Radio New Zealand's This Way Up programme. Now, this wasn't actually going to happen a couple of minutes ago. I talked to the panellists here because Amelia Nurse, who is a producer at Radio New Zealand, received this text message at about 7 minutes ago, and I said, could you please forward it to me? It says, You have won. Your mobile number has won $2.5 million. For claims, email kevinsmith2014@hotmail. So if you want that address again, it's kevinsmith2014@hotmail. Don't. But pretty opportune. So we are going to go ahead anyway because maybe that money might not actually be there. Over the next hour, we're going to discover what cybercrime is. We're going to discuss the victims. We're going to look at what's being stolen, how much is being stolen, and also some tips on staying safe. We're also going to look into the future and some of the new trends with more of us now on mobile. This obviously is the new place where we are going to be approached by criminals from all around the world. We are recording, so at the end there will be a space for questions. So we have a couple of roving mics. I would ask that you wait until the microphone is with you before you ask the question. This will be broadcast on Radio New Zealand, so if we can get those questions with mics, that'd be much appreciated. All right, I'm going to introduce the panel. I'm going to sit down at this stage because I'm sort of stood up here feeling like slightly out of place. So I'm now going to sit down. Paul Ash, here on my left, he's led the National Cyber Policy Office since it was established in July 2012, an organisation that's responsible for cyber security policy here in New Zealand. And prior to this, Paul served as a diplomat, most recently as Deputy Head of Mission in Brussels from 2008 to 2012. Paul is a cyclist as well. Lee Chisholm manages NetSafe's contact centre, which receives over 3,000 requests for a year for guidance and support from individuals, schools, businesses and government agencies, many of which involve incidents that may break New Zealand law. $2 million of losses have been reported to NetSafe in May of this year alone, just to give you a little bit of the scale of the issue. Martin Kleinches is, or was, head of the New Zealand Police National Electronic Crime Group before retiring in April after 30 years of service. I've spoken to Martin over the last 10 years about cybercrime. Martin specialised in covert evidence gathering and recovery through advanced signal processing. He did pioneering work in digital forensics and helped to establish the Electronic Crime Lab. He was awarded the New Zealand Order of Merit in 2010, and Martin is training to become a commercial pilot to fly for an international aid agency as a volunteer. I'm feeling slightly inadequate, but this isn't about me this evening. No, it's not. Finally, Adam Boileau is the technical lead at boutique information security consultancy Insomnia Security, where he and the rest of the team help private and public sector organisations assess their security by breaking in, just like a hacker would. That's the way it works. Adam is one of the organisers of the annual National Hacker Conference, KiwiCon. They had 800 last year to the conference. It sells out. People as far as Norway come to this conference. This year you're planning on 1,200, aren't you?
That's where we may end up, yeah.
Yep, so this is its 8th year, and this is essentially a big hacker conference that happens every year here in Wellington. They opened with a heavy metal band last year, so it's a conference with a bit of a difference. I'm actually going to go, I think, this year, because it sounds like a bit of fun, although I haven't got a beard and a ponytail, so I will be working on that over the next couple of months. Right, let's start with trying to define what cybercrime is, because it's a term that we tend to sort of bandy around and use, and it's difficult to sort of get an idea, and we're going to try and sort of define that. And Paul, let's start with you. How do you define cybercrime?
Well, definitions of cybercrime can be quite challenging, Simon, but generally what we try and do is break it into 2 different areas. One of those is what we call computer-enabled crime. So that's where a traditional crime has been carried out and the computer's been integral to the process of making it happen. And those will be the ones that I think people in the room will be most familiar with, things like fraud, online sexual exploitation of children, intellectual property theft. So increasingly those sorts of things that have been happening for a long time are now being carried out through computers to get great scale and reach. The second part of the cybercrime puzzle is crimes that are directed against computers. So efforts to break a computer or stop it functioning properly, things like a denial of service attack against a website, for example.
And denial of service, just explain briefly, that's a bit of jargon there. What is a denial of service?
Denial of service attack is where essentially a range of requests are made to a website and they overwhelm the capacity of that website to respond. So if you're a business or an organisation that really depends on a website for your livelihood and you're using it to service customers or provide information, having that taken out of action is a big problem.
Lee, you're with NetSafe. How do you define cybercrime? You're sort of on the front line, aren't you? You're essentially answering the phone with people saying, I've had this done, I've sent money here, I have done this, I've lost this.
Yes, and as you said, we had like 1.7 million in losses reported just in the month of May. And many people who report to us are not actually reporting losses, they're just saying, we know this is a scam, we think you should know about it. But cybercrime, it is what Paul said. So we deal really with those more individuals who have been victims of fraud, who have had social engineering happen to them and have often given up money. Yeah, money is often, and often identity as well. So personal information and money. Mm.
And it's true to say that more of us are online for longer periods than have ever been today. Martin, you've been in this game a long time. You have seen it sort of evolve and develop. How do you define cybercrime today?
Well, cybercrime involves all the things that Paul and Lee are talking about, but it also is much wider than that, and it affects us in all aspects of life that we actually don't even might expect. For example, last year there was a large organised crime group around the world who were manufacturing counterfeit airbags that fit in cars. And they were using the internet to promote and sell and organise their business and selling these counterfeit airbags and selling them on eBay and things. And it turned out that they raided these factories and they took these airbags away and tested them, and none of them actually worked properly. You know, they either exploded in somebody's face, or the whole thing exploded in the car, never protecting the people properly. So you give a car accident and you're going to buy a replacement airbag on eBay. You think, oh, that's $300 cheaper. You don't realise that all of a sudden, you know, through all this cyber crime actually has now an effect on road safety, because you have all these fake airbags coming into people's cars. So it's much wider than just being safe on your computer and your mobile and things like that. It affects us everywhere.
Adam, is it too simple then to say that, I mean, these are crimes that have always sort of happened, but now with the computer it's the scale and that has changed, and is that too simple?
There are a lot of crimes that are now just computerised, and fraud is a great example. All the white-collar crimes are just faster and easier. But yeah, the real difference is that you can take a crime that, previously was small scale. I can break into someone's house. You can't, as an individual, break into everybody's house at once on the same night. Whereas on the internet, with computers and with cybercrime, you really can scale it up, you can scale it out, and you can do so very, very efficiently. I mean, it's changed the economics of the crime game quite significantly. And, everything's a computer. As Martin was saying, like, it goes much further beyond, our home computers or our mobile devices. Everything is a computer. Our water system, the sewerage reticulation, planes are just flying computers that you sit inside. Like, that's terrifying to me as a computer security expert, that I'm flying inside a giant Solaris box. That's awful.
You had a really interesting example that you mentioned to me before we came on about US doctors, I guess, which is an indication of how sophisticated some of these cyber criminals are in approaching specific industries now.
Yeah, I think you can use cybercrime to facilitate all sorts of attacks, and you can combine your different types of cybercrime in different ways. And the example you're talking about appeared that there was some kind of payroll service for doctors in the US that was compromised. The data was stolen, and then how do you monetize that data? And the way that these guys came up with it was, maybe not novel. It was novel to me. Maybe it was not so novel to them. Was they filed tax returns for all these doctors with the US Internal Revenue Service, claiming big refunds, and said, send the refunds to this account, in Missouri, and then they collect all the money off they win. 6 months later, the doctors go to do their tax return, and it's already been filed, and we gave you a giant refund. And the doctors are, well, now they've got lots of problems, right? Their taxes are screwed, like their payroll system probably got compromised. Someone's got a lot of money in Missouri. Well, I mean, a money mule in Missouri has a lot of money and has sent it off to Eastern Europe or wherever. And it's a great example of combining these kind of different parts of the crime. It's probably a different set of people that stole the data as to monetize the data through fake tax returns, as to who muled the money, out of Missouri and into, Bulgaria.
Well, what we see is that organised crime is combining all these expertises together. Well, as in the past, it was just one group maybe doing something, but now they actually have different services, and they're very, very smart business models. They're very, very efficient, and they combine all these expertises together to maximise their returns in cyberspace.
When they take all of the just-in-time sort of delivery mechanics that someone like people like Amazon use to make their business very efficient, and now you can build a just-in-time crime pipeline. Putting together all these crimes as a service to make a end-to-end crime business model that steals millions of dollars from doctors in the US.
So we're talking about an industry that is quite mature now. I mean, this is quite a formal industry that you can... I could set up as a cyber criminal and say, look, I've got this great scam, and I could go out and I could buy various business services that allow me to start to commit crimes.
You can buy credit card details, you can buy people who loan the money for you, and then you combine all these things together, and then away you go.
Yeah, and if you can innovate in any one of those particular areas, like if you come up with a better way to do credit card fraud, to turn credit card numbers stolen into real money, then you can go and compete in the some Russian forum marketplace and get a good reputation and make yourself a very handsome living. If you've got that particular thing. I mean, hey, you may come up with a great idea that needs venture capital. You can go to the criminal venture capitalists and make your elevator pitch and get your money and invest it in your service. Like, it's a real business, right? The fact that it's illegal in some jurisdictions, is bad, and the fact that people get ripped off is bad. But it's all the lessons we've learned from how to do online business applies to crime as well.
It's interesting that they've got their own code of ethics as well. Believe it or not, if you
trust people to do business, right?
If you sell credit card details, and it turns out that 80% or some percent don't work, they want their money back.
You get bad feedback.
Or you get bad feedback.
The equivalent, right? Where you
or you'd be banned as a criminal to actually participate in those.
There is honour among thieves.
Yeah.
Well, it's certainly reputational
systems. I mean, they've industrialised and taken to scale crime and put it on the internet and borrowed things. So you do have darknet trade me's that will actually auction bundles of credit card data or other information about people that can then be used by a whole supply chain of providers, from the people that produce the cards through to the money mules that take the money and bring it back again. It's industrialised now.
Yeah, we saw people selling assassination services on the Silk Road, which was an underground kind of
assassination.
Market. Yeah, you could buy assassinations if you wanted.
Could be handy at work.
As to whether the people actually got assassinated, there was some fraud in the assassination marketplace, as I gather. Like, people were just making fake, photoshopping up pictures of dead bodies and then claiming that they'd whacked some guy, and it was not very trustworthy marketplace. But what do you do? Put bad feedback on the assassin?
And this is smart and targeted. I mean, we've seen people coming into New Zealand over long weekends to do their karting activity and then fly out again before the long weekend's over because they're relying on the fact that over their long weekends, New Zealanders like to take a long weekend and not respond really quickly to that stuff. And by the time it's picked up, they're gone.
So crime tourism is a whole new opportunity there. Bed and breakfast, meals, tours.
Collect the air points, why not?
I think a few ideas.
Show you around all the ATMs.
Yeah. Hey, just a quick
Free
survey here.
buses.
Who has actually been compromised here with security, whether that be email, bank, or maybe they've responded to a scam? Does anyone want to sort of put their hand up? And I report on technology for a job, and I'm going to stick my hand up here and tell you that I had my Twitter account compromised, and I spammed all of my followers. It was a bot that basically made everyone on my Twitter list. It made me follow everyone who was following me so that I could then open up a message service with them, and then it messaged everyone, and I was inundated with everyone going, hey, I think you've been compromised, and I was like, oh, and I just sort of shook for about half an hour trying to work out what to do, and then changed all of my passwords everywhere, went to two-step verification on Google, and was sort of off. But it took hours of time and angst. Just hands up, who's actually been compromised here? Okay, so that's probably, yeah, I mean, it's under maybe 10 of us. Anyone want to sort of fess up? Because part of the problem, isn't it, in terms of cybercrime, and I know I've asked each of you this question, is how much money is being lost to cybercrime. It's quite hard to work that one out, isn't it? Paul, I mean, you're with the government. Does the government have a figure that they hold up and go, wee?
No, we don't. And we wouldn't go, wee, if we had it, because we'd be more worried. Look, I think we've got a really shy audience today because we've done some research in April which found that 83% of New Zealanders had suffered some form of cybersecurity breach or other. And, we're not going to be pejorative about the fact you didn't put your hands up because lots of people don't. But, the prevalence of various sorts of breaches is much higher than we had expected. And really that's part and parcel with being on the internet, right? There are good sides to it and bad sides. And it's just like when people started driving on the road. It took some time for the number of casualties of people being knocked over to go down as people understood how to operate and behave on the road, and the rules of the road were developed. And the internet's not entirely dissimilar to that at the moment.
But why don't we actually have a figure, Martin? Why don't we have a figure that we can say, McAfee came out, I think, a couple of weeks ago and said, $500 billion US dollars. Now, this was industrial espionage, and it was also from cybercrime. Now, funny enough, they sell cybercrime software. Scare tactic, I'm not sure, but it seems like their figures, if you Google total cybercrime dollars lost in New Zealand or on the planet, I mean, there's hundreds of $1 million of difference between various figures.
There's no one reporting system though, because for instance, probably 50% of the reports that we get at NetSafe about money lost are referred to us by the police. But police might say to someone, "Oh, you should refer that to NetSafe, and then we can keep those figures." But there's no one conduit for reporting all of those losses, and I think that's a problem.
Yeah, but what we do know is that the proceeds of all this cybercrime actually funds new crimes, funds new developments for new attacks, funds organised crime, funds terrorism, and so it's all being put towards the bad use to make more crime and more attacks. And
I think one of the problems too, Simon, is there are so many different types of crime, and they're quite difficult to value. So lots of New Zealanders, we found in our survey, 20% of them think cybercrime is just a fact of life. They just have to live with it. Another 26% thought it will never happen to me, although the evidence shows from how they responded to other questions that it had. We don't actually see the cost of that. It's not reported anywhere, really. Some of it's absorbed by the organisations like banks and others who are having to grapple to deal with this problem with their customers, and that doesn't then get reported. And then you've got a whole other category around some of the sorts of things Adam's teams work on a lot, which is theft of intellectual property. If a New Zealand company has had its intellectual property, its ideas, its innovation, its ability to do business stolen, first, that's a non-rival, so someone else can be using it while you think you hold it exclusively, and second, it's non-monetised. So trying to value that in advance is really very, very difficult.
And that was the case with the US case against the Chinese hackers. That was about 4 weeks ago, where they had gone in and there were quotes for essentially electricity generation plants, and they got into the Westinghouse server, and they were able to look at the quotes that Westinghouse were quoting to the Chinese for the building of these plants, and they just undercut them. And the pure economics meant that the Chinese won the bids. So that's, you know, a very simple example of intellectual property there.
Yeah, and I think one of the other challenges we face is that if you are breached, if you're hacked, if your company is hacked or your individual accounts are hacked, you're generally disincentivized to tell anyone about that. And if you're a company, right, if you're a bank, for example, and someone steals all your information, you don't want to spook your customers. And so it's in your interest to not tell anyone, not tell your shareholders, not tell your customers, not tell the regulator, not tell, you know, NetSafe or the police or anyone else. You know, the incentive is to keep it quiet. Because you don't want your competitors to say, well, you know, don't go and bank with X because look at them, they lost all your data. And that's, you know, really distorts the numbers and the information that we have about the size and number and severity of breaches.
And on an individual basis, you know, we have new scams and frauds come up all the time, but it's really difficult to get the word out about that because the media actually always want a victim, and a lot of people report those things anonymously to us because it is, you know, they don't feel good about having been taken in or having been tricked. So we can't just go out there and say, we don't have money to advertise, say on TV, hey, you know, there's an immigration scam happening right now, make sure that you don't fall for that, because the media will say, well, we want someone who has fallen for that and whose, you know, their lives have been devastated so we can put them on the screen. So that
Terrible
makes it hard.
media, eh? Terrible.
Yeah, sorry.
I actually, as preparation to come along this evening and talk with you guys, phoned a couple of the banks and spoke to their cyber security departments and said, look, can you give me a figure? And they said no. And I said, but do you actually record how much has been lost? Yep. Right, is it in the millions? Yep. Can you tell me, tens of millions? No, you know, and it was sort of like pulling teeth. And they said, look, this is a really complex area. We have competition. Banking sector is a pretty dynamic place. We have pretty strong brands. And it's not in the interest, I guess, of a financial institution to come out and say, actually, we lost 50 billion of our clients' money last year. Bank with the cyber safety bank. So there are some real issues there around reporting. Do you think that is potentially a barrier to us taking control of cybercrime? The fact that there is shame that the companies will do their utmost to basically cover up. I mean, that's what's happening, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I think one of the things that this really does is it distorts the marketplace, right? As a consumer, if I value security as a property of my banking, you know, who I choose to do my banking services with, I can't make that decision. All of the banks say, we are secure, we've never suffered a breach, you know, your data is safe with us. Right? And as a consumer, I can't choose a bank. I can't incentivize them through my purchasing power to do the right thing. Right? And that's a real challenge. And we've seen some options, you know, in terms of regulation and I mean, things like mandatory data breach disclosure, where if you lose your customers' data, you have to tell them, which doesn't seem unreasonable to me. You know, that kind of thing can help, but it really does. It means that we can't send the signals to banks that we would like to know this information. I think some of the numbers that your surveys have recorded, Paul, is that people are really keen to get more information about cybersecurity. They're keen to understand what the risks are, but we don't tell them, and we can't tell them. And all of my work's under, you know, non-disclosure agreements, and I can't tell you anything at all about anything.
I mean, I think that's absolutely right, and you know, our surveys have shown that 73% of New Zealanders want proactive cybersecurity advice. The Connect Smart campaign we've launched is about actually working with the private sector and government and the NGO community, people like NetSafe, to try and make sure that we're working together on this problem in a way that means we can start to surface some of those issues over time in a way that doesn't threaten the commercial imperatives, but actually helps to get a better handle on the size of the problem and to provide really targeted advice to New Zealanders about how they can operate, but also to corporates about the issues they need to think about in terms of governing the information assets they hold and keeping that safe for their customers. And it's a really difficult problem to work on. International experience has shown the best way to do that is actually within an environment of trust where particular sectors or parts of industry are able to talk and share that problem together and collectively come up with solutions and then put those together with government, because the answers aren't around one sector or one organisation. There's no way we're going to crack this problem without the sorts of people you've got up here talking now and industry working together on it.
And we have, I mean, the facts are we have an industry now that its commodity is our data, our information, what I like, what I had for breakfast, how crispy my sourdough loaf was last weekend. All of this information now that we are emitting is incredibly valuable, not only to advertising companies like Facebook and Google, I call them advertising companies, but also to cyber criminals. And Lee, I'm interested because a lot of the one-to-one crimes that we're seeing, they sort of prey on loneliness and hope, don't they? And those are human emotions that people are always going to fall for. It doesn't matter how much education we do, though people are still going to want company and they're going to want hope, and people are greedy.
Yeah.
I'm greedy.
Yeah, I look at the sort of three things that seem to motivate victims, and that's, as you say, hope, which we could call greed, but I'd rather call it hope. Loneliness and fear, because a lot of the scams that we see which people get caught up in are around fear. So the immigration scam, if you don't pay this money now because you made a mistake on your visa, you're going to be deported. And people were really, really frightened, and they paid the
in New Zealand.
Oh yeah, and they paid the $900 by a money transfer system to try and save themselves being deported. There's always that sense of urgency, of immediacy. We've had a spate of people getting blackmailed about things that they've done online, usually with no clothes on. It's a really good, the moral of that story is to keep your clothes on online, because anyone can record that and they come back and try and blackmail you. Mostly it's been men, I would have to say. Yeah.
Vaseline around the edges. Soft focus.
We better put that advice on our websites, right? Stay clothed online.
Absolutely. Yeah, because people have been actually really, really distressed about the thought of that video going viral, going onto Facebook, being sent to an employer, that sort of thing. So there's the loneliness, the people who want to feel special and be loved, and who doesn't, but they find that online and people exploit that. And then there's the hope. I've had a terrible time. I've had 3 years of living in an earthquake house, and things that not being able to afford anything. And look, this lottery came in, and I only have to spend $5,000, and I'm going to get the $150,000. That hope. So those are some of the things that drive people who, have been tricked by cybercrime.
And these sort of crimes have nothing to do with having antivirus on your computer, or having a safe and updated system.
No.
It's completely human. The human
behaviour.
factor.
So that would then suggest the fact that it is human, it's one-to-one, it's appealing to those sort of core emotions, that's a really hard thing to sort of filter out, isn't it? And how do you educate a population or a society around that? I understand the work you're doing, Adam, where you're actually working with organisations, and these days we're giving so much more information, data to organisations. We have the patient portal, which is now coming here into New Zealand. We have medical records. We're talking to doctors. We have IRD. You can do all your IRD now. I mean, so it's a hard one. That's always going to be there, but the organisations obviously are still going to be spending on keeping that data secure, aren't they?
Well, you'd certainly hope so. They have a responsibility to keep that data secure. But of course, the challenge is that whilst there is I guess a differentiation between the crimes that target individual people and the crimes that target data and companies, all those people work somewhere, and we're seeing an increasing trend where if you want the data from a particular company, like if you're going after Fonterra's recipe for chocolate milk, right? You might go and target someone who works at Fonterra. Right, get them at home, compromise their Facebook. If their corporate password reset process is, what's your dog's maiden name? Right, you go and look on Facebook, you find the dog's tennis partner or whatever, and you fill in the password reset process, and you attack the corporate through the personal aspect. So these things combine in ways that often people don't think about. I mean, the fact that you're going to post details about what your dog ate for breakfast and his crispy sourdough on Facebook without really thinking about that, the downstream impact that can have on you, I guess there's so many challenges, things that people, all the things people used to have to worry about normally, all the regular fraud, and now all this extra stuff that we've, facilitated through Facebook and Google and those things.
That the threat from within an organisation is much greater than the threat from outside. So employees, disgruntled employees, they're the worst.
With Snowden.
Yeah. Disgruntled employees within an organisation are far worse than actually the threat from outside.
And often people don't realise, like they will report something to us and say, it's okay, I didn't lose any money, I just gave them my driver's licence and passport and email.
You didn't lose any money yet.
Yeah, exactly. But that, of course, is very valuable data, that personal information, and it's very easy to be pulled into just giving that and then realising, oh, this is not quite right, but then it's too late. Yeah.
Or also giving it without your knowledge.
Oh,
I mean, there's
yeah.
all these free apps on your phones, messaging apps. And, so, and then you don't pay money. You know, you don't just, this apps would like access to your address book, would like access to your photos, would like access to your microphone, or access to your camera. So by actually getting this free app on your phone and think, I can freely communicate and send pictures and text messages for free, you actually pay for it with your personal data.
Yeah.
And people don't realise that. And the organised crime is behind it as well. They bring out an app, which you get on your phone, and then they get all your address book and everything else, and your data, and you've given it away without actually knowing that you have
I think the thing that we say is that if you're not paying for a product, you're not the customer, you're the product. Right? If you didn't pay for it, they're selling you. Yeah. Right? You're not buying a thing, you're being sold. So if you're getting it for free, that's what you're doing, and you're participating voluntarily in some kind of transaction, but it's probably not the transaction you thought it was.
And there's a real challenge there, because the data's been given away generally freely. You've consented to give your data away, and most people are in a really unequal power relationship with the people they've given it to. They have very little information about how they're going to handle it, what they will do with it. And there are now really good data aggregators. There's one operating out of New Zealand that pulls together information from a whole pile of social media sites, bundles it up. You can get free access to some of it, but they will then sell chunks of that data onto others. And the problem with that is that when people like the Privacy Commissioner have looked at it, the data's been freely given. So they've had a real problem dealing with that.
Yeah, we've had a lot of complaints about that one.
You know the one, yeah.
Oh, I know the one.
It sounds quite a lot like LinkedIn's business model to me.
Yeah, I mean, the thing with LinkedIn is they've got a privacy policy out there, whether or not you're comfortable with it, but this is a different one again. And that's really challenging, because most people who put their information on one or two of these places don't realise that it's being scraped, aggregated, sold, and then can be used to socially engineer attacks against people.
But how do we educate people to know the fact that convenience, we're prepared to give up a lot of privacy for convenience, and for the freemium model, that's the basis, isn't it? That we give all this data and we go, well, it was free, and look, Instagram, it's nice, isn't it? And there's all of this data, all of this back in. I mean, that's legal, although that does obviously then allow the criminal sector to get in there and actually work out who you are and what the name of your dog is and the names of your children and your birth date, which is normally a pretty good way of getting a password.
Absolutely, yeah.
So we have a sophisticated industry that is their business model. Is that a challenge then for cybersecurity? Paul, do you see that as a...
Well, it's both a challenge and an opportunity, I think. I mean, the internet's on us now, and New Zealand... absolutely, on us, all the time.
Oh, I thought you said honest.
Oh, no, on us, on us.
Somebody flick a switch.
Yeah, sorry.
The honest internet.
Would that we could, but it's not that easy. The internet's on us everywhere we go. We found 2 years ago, the household internet survey showed that 80% of New Zealanders were on the internet. Great. The research we did in April showed that 80% of New Zealanders access the internet on a mobile device. That's quite a big shift. It's with us in our cars, it's with us wherever we go, and it's actually brought some extraordinary changes to New Zealanders. The change that the internet is delivering around getting rid of the tyranny of distance and connecting us to the world is really positive. So the key thing, I think, for cybersecurity then is to make sure that at all parts of the spectrum, people are well educated about how to use the information and how to protect themselves. So that involves making sure corporates are looking after data properly, but also helping New Zealanders to understand how much do you really want to share? How much do you want to put out there if you don't know what's going to happen to it? Where would you want to do your banking online? Really? You want to go and do that on the bus on free Wi-Fi in the middle of town? Not so sure that that's a good idea. So helping New Zealanders really to get a bit more savvy and smart about how they connect is a big part of that puzzle.
Martin, in your time looking at the enforcement side, how many cyber criminals did you sort of lock up?
Not many, because they're generally overseas. Therefore, they can hide very easily on the internet. They live in countries where Western law enforcement doesn't well connect. I remember working on an investigation which ended up in Eastern Europe, and the file went through our British counterparts to the Eastern European country. And the file came back and said, no, you're wrong, they're not here. They must be, they're not living here. And law enforcement clearly was part there of the whole crime group. So they're very, very difficult to catch.
Yeah, it's a very real challenge because in many cases in those economies, the police are part of the problem. Right? And if you are in Russia and you're committing, if you're ripping off Ukrainians right about now and you're in Russia, do you really think you're going to get arrested? Like it's just not going to happen. And as attackers, right, they know that. Right, they know how to cross jurisdictions to make it difficult. They know who has mutual legal assistance treaties with whom. They know how to work that system. They're hackers. It's their job to look at how the system works and then figure out how to exploit it. And that applies equally to the legal system, international relationships, financial systems, as well as the technical and computer systems.
It's called organised crime for a reason. It's really organised. And a UN study in 2013 found that 80% of cybercrime was organised crime. This is not a young bloke down the road
wearing a hoodie.
Sorry?
Wearing a hoodie.
You're wearing a hoodie. This is actually well-organised groups. They have their own office buildings. There are thousands of them working together, and often they are in places where law enforcement is not able to either not able to get to them or actually is them.
And even the ones that are not organised crime, but are perhaps ripping people off on Facebook Facebook trade pages, buy and sell Facebook pages and stuff like that. People put their money into a bank account but never get that cheap iPhone or never get that dress that they bought off Walk-in Wardrobe on Facebook. Even though they put it into a New Zealand bank account, the resource that would be required to follow that up is beyond the capability of, it's not priority for police. And people are often surprised when they say, but I've got this bank account, I paid money in there, I never got my goods, how come no one's going to do anything? Well, they're not.
So prevention is definitely the answer here. Prevention first.
And the interesting thing is, all of the prevention we're talking about is primarily social and people. It's not technological. We treat cybercrime like it's a technical problem that the IT department's going to sort out. It's not, right? I mean, there are obviously technical aspects, but by and large, this is just, it's being street savvy, right? It's being smart in an environment that's different than what many of us are used to, but it's not a technical issue. And solving it with, Norton antivirus, maybe not the best advice.
And there's a particular problem in there for us, I think, as New Zealanders. We tend to be a trusting bunch. As a society, it's one of the distinctive features. It's quite disarming and quite charming about New Zealanders. If we're doing a transaction with someone, I'll walk along the street and I'll look at Adam or Martin or Lee. I'll be looking them in the face, doing a transaction with them, talking with them, and I'll be able to size them up and I'll know they're Kiwis and it's a small place. If something goes wrong, we can find them, or we can get Martin and the police too. Or Adam, but that costs a bit more. The problem online is that we have no idea who's at the other end, and the default operating model for most New Zealanders is I'm engaging with someone I trust, and online that just doesn't work because you absolutely have no idea who is at the other end of that trust equation, and it's a really unequal relationship. And so in a prevention model, one of the key things to do is get people thinking, actually, if that sounds too good to be true, well, it probably is too good to be true. The $2.5 million you just won on your phone, we can't go down to the backbencher and spend it having a pint because it's really not there, okay? And that's the real challenge.
Let's just look at recourse. What can you do if you have sent your $200 to Keith Smith 2014 at Hotmail, trying to chase your $2.5 million? If I've used a credit card, will the bank refund that money? You
can apply to the bank for a chargeback, and then that's up to the bank. But if you've sent it by a money transfer system, it's gone. And that's that, or it's the 300,000K that someone in Auckland sent.
And it's just
gone.
Goodbye.
It's gone, yeah. One simple thing about online shopping, a lot of us shop online. If you look at a website, one that you haven't used before, you haven't heard about, just put it in Google with the word scam after it. People report these things. So people come to us and say, I've lost my money on this website. And when I looked it up, I saw that other people had too. Well, the idea is to look it up first. If they could look it up first, simple.
So the answer is you could spend $200 for that life experience of learning that people on the internet will rip you off, or you could go to NetSafe or securitycentral.org or connectsmart.gov.nz and get some of that advice in advance. It's a lot cheaper and a lot easier.
It requires a fundamental shift of thinking. When we lived in the physical age, we were worried about our physical security, but we were physically, we had a situational awareness, if you do it properly. But now in the now that we're even in the information age, you need a digital situational awareness around you all the time, with everything you do. And that for us, for some of us who actually come from we were grown up in the physical age, it's quite difficult to make the transition. But for the young ones, it'd be quite easy to become situationally aware of what's happening around you. What I buy on eBay, is that the right thing to buy? Even if I don't lose money, is it the right product that I should be buying? Or should that airbag, should I go to a reputed dealer and pay $300 more for this airbag? So it's from your security on your device to using your mobile, where are you going to use it, what service you're going to use, what apps do I get on my phone, to whatever I'm going to buy. It's constantly, you have to ask yourself that question, is there a threat here?
And that's tiring, though, isn't it?
It is tiring.
And it's very difficult for
but it's
youth,
reality.
because youth don't have that long-term consequence. They don't have the cognitive ability to think long-term. So the sort of things that they're doing, the apps, the free apps that they're downloading, thinking, yay, I'm going to download this app, and it doesn't matter that it's going to take all my Facebook contacts, whatever.
And that's true for a lot of youth. I think one of the interesting things we're seeing as digital natives grow is that they're operating in a different set of trust environments than older New Zealanders, for whom that notion of who you trust is built up with who was in your community and your neighbourhood.
Yeah.
My kids these days will look at stuff online and they are really cynical and savvy. That's a scam. I'm just not going near that
So
stuff.
that's the difference between growing up with Encyclopedia Britannica and Wikipedia,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
One of these things teaches
And being
much more
told not to
critical
cite it
assessment.
on a school project, Don't cite Wikipedia. Why? It's just, encyclopedia in the sky, because it could be inaccurate. So it's good, refreshing to see that.
And there's a thing there, I think, about community, because actually becoming more savvy yourself, becoming smarter about how you operate online, is actually helpful for your friends and your work as well. It's no mistake that a lot of the cyber security policy folk are looking at places like the Centre for Disease Control to look at epidemiology and understand how that works, how as you build resilience and vaccinations into communities, you start to get an immunity effect. And a big part of education for New Zealanders as a discrete, relatively small place is around making sure that people act more smartly online and they think more about family, work and friends and how they operate in those contexts. And there's quite a bit in that around community appeal. It really is part of that core set of Kiwi values.
Lee, on the front line there at NetSafe, do you get young people phoning you having been scammed, or is it primarily guys like me with very little hair and sort of 20, 30 years to go with high-end?
It is primarily adults, but then young people are not necessarily going to use that medium to report something, and they probably haven't got that much money to spend anyway. It's not that likely. They are quite savvy, particularly about some aspects. If someone asks us a sexual question, it's like, oh, yuck, no, we'll just block that person. We know about that.
On social media.
But downloading Secret, which is, a new app, we'll do that. And it doesn't matter that, that in the terms and conditions it says, like you say, it's going to take all my contacts or take all my friends and, spam them as well. So there's a difference in.
Let's just spend a little bit of time looking at what's on the horizon. And I've got a personal story here to share. Last week, my wife got a call on her cell phone, and there was an Air New Zealand voice. It was the audio from an Air New Zealand ad. And she said, it sounded pretty legit. And then there was a sort of click, 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 and then there was a voice of someone, distant voice, saying that she had to pay some money to get her $900 or whatever access to these flights. And she was like, no, classic sort of 419, pay a little money to get a load of money. This was Air New Zealand. Quite sophisticated in terms of grabbing web audio, getting on Audacity or some sort of sound editing software and building quite a good story. Is that what we're going to see more of? What do you guys see in your crystal balls in terms of where we're heading? And maybe Adam, let's start with you, because you're out there at the moment. You're helping companies stay safe, but you also organise this hacker conference. I'm not saying hackers are the guys who are doing this, but hackers understand how you can do it. So that's the thing about software, is you're limited by your imagination. There's no more physical barriers.
Yeah, certainly the range of things that can happen is expanding as we computerize everything. I mean, we saw at KiwiCon, the hacker conference that I run, we saw last year a kid from Christchurch turn up having hacked the Christchurch bus card system. And you would assume that a transit card system for a major metropolitan city would have been reviewed by someone, and there had been real basic things wrong with it. But you say, well, what can I do with a transit system? Well, I can steal money, I can track people's movements based on when they get on and off the bus, I can figure out when they're not going home at the right time. There's all sorts of stuff that you can do, and each of these niches really has opportunities for turning into crime or turning into a business model, right? or turning into something else. You're really limited by your imagination there, and the more things we computerize, the more complexity we build, the less people who understand the whole system end to end, and the more opportunities there are to turn that into something you didn't expect. And the hacker mindset is, how does this work and why? And what happens if I stick my finger there or I break it like this? And you can use that for good, you can use it for evil. And the range of people with that skills is growing, right? I mean, people who are growing up with this much technology, with this much complexity, who are used to being very critical about the sources of information they get, it's natural for them to ask, but why? But how does this bus card work? And then if they go and look, well, it got broken in Christchurch, like maybe I go look at another city, right? Try the same things again. We call that same bug, different app. And that's it's a methodology for finding things that are broken based on other people's work. And you can turn that into, it's limited by your imagination. Like, what do you want to do? Do you want to turn off the water supply? Like, do you want to fly a plane? Do you want to move a satellite around? Like, these are all things that, some kid's going to wake up this morning and go, you know what? I really would like to have a satellite. That would be awesome, right? And if you're motivated, like maybe you have to be, at that point, maybe a university student, have a little more experience. But I mean, the list of things that have been done by a bored university student with an electron microscope is actually quite large. I mean, transit cards, you scrape the top off, you put a bit of acid, you look at the electron microscope, all of a sudden free bus tickets, yay, right? And university students will do that for fun. And if that's what you do for fun, imagine what you can do for crime. So I mean, the options are really limited by your imagination.
Martin, where do you see us heading? Just gaze into your crystal ball.
Yeah, I think I see a big shift towards mobile apps being a mobile malware on mobile phones, trying to steal your identity, eventually your money. So I think that's the big shift. It's going to be toward mobile devices. Computers at home are not really of interest so much anymore. And we used to go do search warrants in people's houses a couple of years ago. You would find one computer, or maybe two. Now they do search warrants and they come across 11 or 12 mobile devices and Xboxes, and everything is online, TV online, everything is online. But it's the mobile devices and the mobile technology and the apps that will target people individually for their information and eventually their money and their...
So mobile ransomware is one as well that's starting to happen quite a bit. I know in Australia and New
malicious
Zealand...
software malware on mobile phones.
Your phone is locked unless you pay someone X amount of dollars. It will not be unlocked, and having quite good hit rates apparently with people sending money. Briefly, Lee, where do you see us heading? What's your sort of crystal ball there telling you?
I don't know about all of the technical stuff, but I'm hoping that people will clue up more and more about how much information is out there and how easy it is to give away too much, and how to actually protect yourself in behavioural ways rather than necessarily the technical ways. That's what I would hope, as we just keep talking about it and keep hearing about it. Yeah.
Fine. Where do you see us heading, Paul?
A range of increasingly sophisticated threats, and I think we can start to see some blurring between what we've called cybercrime in the past, some of the hacktivism, hackers for hire. This is not the ethical side of it, but actually the side that would, in countries where the jurisdictional issues are more difficult, be working for those organised crime groups. An increase, as Martin says, in the attack surface, as we're all carrying smartphones. That's not a phone anymore, folks. That's a computer in your pocket. And that becomes an entirely different equation around how you deal with it. And really a bigger blurry line between cybercrime and other sorts of crime as we see more and more products connected to the internet. So, the Internet of Things. Cars these days start with, a chip and a start button. Really convenient, but what happens, to the level of electronic crime when people start hacking into those and having a crack at them? And really that's a big shift in thinking for governments as well, because the first priority of a government is to keep its people safe and secure. That's the basis for the social contract and why you have law enforcement done by governments rather than lots of private companies. And cybercrime poses some real challenges with this level of sophistication as governments the world over are really struggling to work out how to deal with this and how to keep their citizens safe in that environment.
You know the world's changed when the Zetas drug cartel in Mexico kidnaps a bunch of cellular network engineers and then stands up their own cell network, right? So they don't have to worry about lawful intercepts by the police being able to intercept the Mexican cellular network. They run their own. They put their own towers on the hills. They run their own network. The world is really changing.
Or the example in Antwerp not long ago where organised crime took over the container distribution system in the port so that the containers that had cocaine shipments in them could be moved away from screening and taken through the port more quickly. It becomes really very, very challenging as ordinary crime and cybercrime start to blur. And these are very imaginative, smart people we're grappling with.
And every time you send a hacker kid to jail for defacing someone's website, right, he goes in, he meets the real criminals, and he gets inducted into that world and teaches them all his tricks. Yeah.
Sounding a bit depressing, isn't it, really, guys? I'm going to go claim my $5.5 million and see if I can actually give in. No, I'm going to give him an email. Hey, can we just finish? What is the one piece of advice that each of you has? And keep it short and sharp for me and for us to stay safe. And I might start with one. Is it sort of the golden rule is never give your password, never respond to an email that asks you for your password? Is that a good place to start, or is that too simplistic?
It's a bit simplistic.
Okay, I'm too simplistic. I'm looking for practical tips here.
It's about, as I said before, situational awareness in the digital world that you live in. Be aware, either through and there's another email coming. You want another prize?
Kevin Smith telling you to hurry up.
So it's constantly being aware of what am I doing in this digital environment, and either learn it the hard way or learn it away from other people, and try to be safer there. And together with industry and law enforcement, there's a huge challenge for law enforcement worldwide, because it's a world problem. It's not an individual problem for an individual country, and law enforcement needs to work combined to tackle those. And break down those networks that actually enable all these cyber crimes and these rip-offs to happen. So it's a huge challenge for law enforcement, and unfortunately the technology moves much faster than the budgets of law enforcement agencies worldwide. Mm-hmm. So it's a massive challenge. But the combined effort with industry, law enforcement, and people becoming more digitally aware of their own environment, that'll make it work at the end of the day.
I think if you want concrete practical advice, right, that you could say to someone right now, typically the advice we give them isn't very good. And if you had to pick a couple of things from me, I would say, one, don't reuse passwords. Use a different password for every site. That's difficult to do. Get a piece of software called a password manager that you store all your passwords in, have a good password for that, and don't reuse things across sites. That way, if someone compromises eBay, for example, which we saw happen relatively recently, and steals 140 million people's worth of passwords, your password was only for eBay, it doesn't compromise your banking. Second piece of advice I would give you is, if you're doing high-value things, banking online, or things that you're worried about, and you're particularly worried about fraud, and you feel that you're at risk, like if you've got teenage kids who are using your computer and you're worried about what they're doing and that's going to compromise your banking, get a separate device. Use that for high-value things. Like buy a tablet, okay, you have to spend a bit of money up front. Buy a tablet, do your banking on it, don't do anything else, right? Don't install apps on it, don't Facebook from it. Use it for banking, right? If you buy a small one, you can stick it in your pocket. You can still have the convenience of doing this while you're out and about. And that way, you've mitigated the risk in a way that is straightforward and simple and isn't complicated and doesn't require software updates and doesn't require you to click on stuff. Buy a thing, do your banking. And if the banks were honest about how much fraud there was, they would probably buy you the tablet to solve the fraud cost, right? And we will see that, right? I mean, I think if the fraud gets worse, we'll get to the point where the banks will say, if you are our customer, we will give you a tablet, we will manage it, and you will only do banking on it. And that will solve that particular type of banking fraud, right? And the criminals will find something else to do and we'll move on. But that's, I think, a practical thing that isn't complicated, right? And hopefully, if you agree, that's sensible advice. I think
good advice.
People
they're giving away tellies with mortgages. Why not a tablet?
But why not?
Paul?
Look, I think the advice there is really good around secure passwords, using a secure Wi-Fi network if you're doing sensitive stuff online, banking, etc. What we would say is that actually some of the best advice is tailored to the way people behave online. And our research showed that there are sort of 5 different groups of New Zealanders, by and large, who operate in quite different ways online. And what we would recommend people do is go to connectsmart.gov.nz, take the digital plans quiz, which will help them work out, are they a digital convert, a cautious connector, heaven forbid, a digital cowboy, we've got a few of those out there, a digital pace setter, and get advice that meets them in that particular category. And from there they can find access to a whole range of really good sources of advice, including the excellent stuff that folk like NetSafe and Google and others have put together here in New Zealand.
And clearly your quiz works well, because I filled out the quiz and it put me in the category of the only guy with a beard. The only graphic that had a guy with a beard is the category it put me in. So clearly you've done your research.
Cowboys, isn't it?
Yeah. You know, Adam, this is about customer-centred government delivery of services, and we designed that especially for your category.
So no one's answered the password question yet. Do I give my password up in an email? Lee, what do you reckon?
Of course you don't. Of course you don't. You never give your
I
password
get asked like twice a week.
And nobody with good intentions will ask you your password ever. Yeah, and we say like 15 characters.
15 characters for your password?
15 characters,
Oh, that would hurt in the morning.
Uppercase, lowercase, symbols, numbers, mixed up, no
But
dictionary
you're storing it in a
words.
password safe, right? You're not typing it in from memory every time. You store it in a password safe and you open it up with a password that is good and that you do have to remember, and then you go, I'm going to log into my bank, copy bank password, paste into password field, done.
Do you pay for that service? You pay for a password bank?
There's free software that does that. You don't have to pay for it. There are some,
free.
Yeah, free is good.
You just warned us off free stuff.
They probably do, yes. No,
They want to know your dog's name at the same time as they give you the software.
Hey, well, thank you guys. Thanks a lot. And I'll get you to put your hands together to our panel. Thanks a lot. Now, questions. So if you have questions, stick your hand up, and straight away we've got to take it there for $2, $2 at the back on the right. Chap standing up over there, please, could you get him a microphone? They are $2 a question, by the way, and they will go up as we move through the evening. We've got to be out of here by midnight.
Gold coin.
Gold coin.
Yeah. All right. This is a question, possibly a suggestion or a query. With Paul, I'm curious about how things like using RealMe, the government adopting RealMe, and Inland Revenue going to full internet taxation processing, both of those seem complete lunacy to me, because all you're doing is you're making it easier to create the gap that so if somebody breaks that, they've got all the information. Whereas with RealMe, you've got one password that does everything. So that's sort of the question for you. My question for Adam, sort of, is...
Is this a question or a statement, sir? Is it a question or are you making statements?
No, they're questions.
Okay.
Yeah, so my question is, how is the government addressing this issue, which seems to be a fatal flaw in its digital logic? And the question for Adam, I suppose we have to put it directly, is why don't the hackers, instead of attacking, say, Christchurch City Council and getting caught with the cops and all that sort of thing, why don't they attack all these criminals? Why don't we have concerted effort for all the hackers to attack the criminals? Because in the end, if they take the money off them, they're not going to complain. They're going to make sure they do it quietly. I mean, I think it's a brilliant solution.
Eye for an eye? I'm not sure about that as an approach. What do you reckon?
Absolutely, we do see hackers attacking other hackers, hackers attacking criminals. I mean, if you're defrauded on an online drugs market, what are you going to do? Phone Martin, right? Yes, people do get ripped off, and that's why those marketplaces have really strong reputational systems. They're better than TradeMe. You get better, buyer feedback and that kind of thing. But absolutely, we do see that kind of activity, and we've seen vigilante hacker groups go after child pornographers, for example, of their own initiative, and we've seen them turn up, at the police and say, here is a dossier that we, anonymous. Compiled about these child pornographers, off you go. And it does happen. We do see this kind of thing. So, there's a great diversity of hackers doing all sorts of things, and some of them are, exactly that kind of, vigilantism or interesting things.
I'll give you an example of that. When we had the first ever phishing attack, which was on one of the banks, they sent out emails for people to respond even with a username and password. And what we did was we had a couple of robots sitting in the office who were doing nothing else than sending false usernames and passwords back to them. So they got hundreds of thousands of usernames and passwords that actually didn't work. And amongst there were maybe 400 that actually did work. So how are they going to shift those hundreds of thousands of usernames and passwords to find the 400 real ones? So we actually fool them that way.
It sounds like a denial of service attack, Martin. Are you sure that's legal?
We didn't have any those laws in those days, so it was all right.
Paul, government's encouraging us all to go online and comply online. Good point there. You're creating more opportunities for people to basically get in there and steal our information. What do you say to that?
Look, I think the thing there is the internet as a whole has been a real net benefit to people. It's made our lives much easier doing things like banking, shopping, communicating and connecting with other people. So the first place to start really is that the online world has really shifted the way people do business, interact and communicate, and it's made some things really positive and a lot easier, and we shouldn't lose sight of that when we're thinking about the fact that there are negative elements to the internet. Being able to file your taxes online, that's actually really, really quick. It's much easier than it used to be, and it's improved compliance rates significantly, and the security risk against that is a small percentage. RealMe as a tool is a really useful way of authenticating yourself online across a number of different platforms, and it's actually really very much like the sorts of password aggregators or wallets that Adam was talking about. Once you've managed to authenticate yourself, and you have to do that physically with RealMe, and use the RealMe password, you've actually got a secure means of communicating and connecting with government. And now, no one's going to say that every secure method is fail-safe. This is something that companies and banks are working through all the time. But having the ability for New Zealanders to be able to establish a secure online identity and have that protected to a really high level and work with that identity is a really, really valuable tool. And the government's objective at the moment is that 70% of New Zealanders' communications and business with government will be online by 2017. That's a really laudable objective and will actually move us into a digital space where New Zealand's economy is one of the most competitive and advanced in the world. We have to manage and keep sight of that as we're managing the security issues that go alongside it.
Thank you. Good questions.
Question for Adam. Where can we buy software that will bounce an unwanted email back to the sender as if you haven't received it in your inbox? And also, years ago, you used to be able to track where material had come from. That software seems to have disappeared. I haven't got it any longer.
So obviously, different email providers vary quite a lot in terms of the services they offer. I mean, if you, for example, are using Google's email product these days, you can flag an email as a scam or as a fraud, report it as spam, and that will typically set up filtering so that you don't see that kind of content again.
It doesn't send it back to the sender as if you never received it.
No, it doesn't. You can, if you run your own mail server, obviously you have more control over exactly how you go about doing that. And we see a lot of people adopting different strategies. I mean, one is when you see an incoming message that you can identify as spam, rather than receiving it or immediately returning it to sender, you can just say, yes, I'll accept that mail. And then hold, and they call it tar pitting, right? We make the attacker slow down, make the person sending you the mail slow down, which kind of provides a benefit to everyone else, right? You're helping the community at large, and some of the big mail providers do that kind of thing, and it's it is I guess we're seeing email's popularity drop off, and so there's a number of other mechanisms that other mediums people communicate through that have different security properties, but doing email security, despite it predating the internet, really. I mean, email was around before we had, the internet was email on a different platform.
Email.
Yes, and so we still haven't managed to get email right after heading towards 40 years. So it is a real challenge, and even something as well. I guess we only have to look at how well Telecom Extra's mail platform via Yahoo has been doing lately. It's really hard somehow to do email. I wish I had a good answer for you, but it's difficult for no good reason, and we, the technology industry, suck. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Thank you for your question. Jan, did you have a question? He's not a plant, by the way. I don't know. He came up to me and said, can I ask questions?
Yes.
Just in case you're thinking he's a friend, because they often do that at these sort of events. They plant people in the audience to ask questions. Cheers, Jan.
So I work in the IT industry, and I come across a few very worrying symptoms. And that is, one, for example, the company office publishes all company directors' details on Facebook. So you can find within 10 minutes John Key's signature, you can find his bank details, and you can find his address of his registered company, and you can just scrape that, and you can just do identity fraud. Now, that sort of thing, where a government agency is doing this, how can we actually stop these silly government departments doing this sort of thing? The other one that I've come across is, this is now the second time that I've come across it, is passport information, driver license information that's going to be stored in systems of government departments. And you mentioned, Adam, eBay. eBay is a company with $260 billion revenue, more than the GDP of New Zealand. They even can't secure it, and yet these silly government departments are going to store our passport information and our driver's license information in some system that I can hack. Now, that to me is nuts, and how can that be stopped?
Well, Paul, there's only one person, I think, on the stage that I'm going to... I might go and claim my money at this stage.
That spotlight's looking brighter and brighter by the moment.
Turn that one up there. I want sweat on the brow for this one.
Look, I think let's turn that round a bit. I mean, governments have to perform a whole range of functions for their citizens, and that involves holding a lot of data that is sensitive or confidential. Increasingly, there really is no option but to do that electronically. Keeping that as paper records would lead us to a situation where I think the citizens of New Zealand would be very, very unhappy, first about the number of public servants we had to employ to manage all that data, and second about the quality of the service and timeliness of the service they got. In the world we live in, it's really not realistic just to have data that sits in a paper-based system and is not managed efficiently and effectively. That's the efficiency side of the equation. The security of that data is then a real challenge. And over the past few years, I think government has discovered just how difficult managing this can be and has put in place systems to try and lift its security around that. And a big part of that is the really excellent work that the Government Chief Information Officer has been doing over the last couple of years to try and lift information security around particular departments. And I think, you know, it's again that issue of managing the efficiency of systems and trying to keep them as secure as possible at the same time. But if we were to go back to the sort of paper-based systems we used to have, I think the public response to that would be enormous.
Well, they'd probably elect the Internet Party, and then where would we be, right?
Yeah. Well, I won't comment on individual political parties, but, you know, governments like corporates are having to learn pretty fast how to secure data, how to keep it safe, and how to push back really hard against those that would access it illegally. And let's not beat around the bush here. Going after that data is an illegal act.
Except for the company's office, because that's public data, and you can just scrape the signatures, and it's really useful.
And there are some real issues there, because things like companies' registers, there are generally requirements to have certain information that is publicly available. It's important for New Zealanders to be able to go and find that information.
Sorry, I looked at the tax. There is nowhere that it says thou shalt publish it on Facebook.
Who's publishing it on Facebook?
Really?
It's not on Facebook.
That's one of those disgruntled employees, maybe, on the way out. Friday night drinks.
Maybe somebody actually, you know, forwarded all their mail to Facebook.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, it's be worth...
It's part of the whole publishing process. It happens all the time. And it's done.
Thank you, Jan, for that question. Anybody else? We've got some chap over there. Thank you.
Hi, question for Paul mostly. So we've got all this RealMe, etc. going on, but we also have electronic passports now. Why are we not using our passports as our main form of identification?
That's a really good question, and one that I think goes right back to the question in New Zealand of the kinds of civil liberties that we have here in New Zealand. I mean, passports can be used for identification if people wish to use them as identification. It's actually rather difficult to do that online. You can put your passport in front of the computer screen and photograph it, or you could try and insert it in the old floppy disk slot if you still had one. But you know, it's not an easy thing to do unless you've actually got an electronic ID that is authenticated and that you can carry around and keep safe with you on your devices. And in effect, that's what RealMe is about doing. And RealMe and the passport system over time will become increasingly closely linked. And I think, you know, if you have a RealMe ID, over time that's going to be something that can be used for you to validate your identity when you're applying for a passport. So you're not too far off actually. The different platforms. But New Zealanders, for instance, traditionally have been somewhat resistant to carrying identity cards. I've lived in Europe where they were compulsory, but here in New Zealand that's not something New Zealanders have liked over time, so it's been a sort of voluntary choice to opt into a system and use an ID. RealMe provides you with the opportunity, you know, to manage the complexity of a large number of passwords. The last thing you'd want to do as a New Zealander, if you're interacting with a private sector organisation like a bank, and multiple public sector organisations, is have to have separate passwords for all of those. So it's actually not dissimilar to the idea of a password generator or a secure password locker that you can use, except that you've actually physically had to go and verify your identity before you can get a RealMe identity.
I mean, there are some places in the world where they do exactly this. I mean, Estonia is a good example of a country that has a relatively modern identity infrastructure where, you know, when you are born, you are enrolled in the national public key infrastructure. You are issued a certificate, like a digital certificate, along with your, you know, your birth certificate. And they may get as far as chipping you, I don't know. But yeah, and it does work well. All government services in Estonia are authenticated using this particular thing. The downside, of course, as one of the other commenters alluded to, is that it's a centralised point of risk as well, right? It's one system that the return on investment for hacking is very high, and that's a concern when you have a mandatory system. But you know, hopefully that's something that the government is well equipped to manage.
And I think if you looked at that, you know, there'd have to be a really good civic discussion around that sort of program in any country that looked to adopt it, because citizens have to be confident that if people are managing that level of data about them, you know, it's one small step from that to, you know, the sorts of science fiction scenarios where you have a chip implanted in your arm at birth, you know. It's not a dissimilar set of constructs that get you to that point. So, you know, there's actually a set of democratic decisions and discussions around human rights standards and civil liberties that would need to be managed to get to that point, I think.
Do we have any more questions? I'll come over this side and then we'll come back for the last one over there. Thank you.
Hello. Before cybercrime, a mugger would put his knife to your throat and take your wallet. And governments gradually realised that what you would do is you would educate the mugger and he would get an honest job, and this would deal with the crime. These days, with cybercrime, the government says what you should do is walk down the street wearing a suit of armour, and that will keep you safe. Are we really so far on the back foot that all we can do is protect ourselves? Obviously, we can't educate the cyber criminals any more than they're already educated. Are they irredeemably criminal?
Pretty much.
Right.
I mean, prosecution, we can't prosecute them. They're physically not there in the street. We can't, from what Martin said, and Martin spent years working for the police, it sounded like you actually didn't bust that many cyber crims.
Well, if they were local, you would probably get them, but as soon as they're overseas, it's not going to happen.
That comes back to a lesson in civics and communities in many senses, because you can do that sort of education program in a place like New Zealand, and over time you'd hope that, you know, the number of people with knives lurking around the corner reduced because they wanted to be constructive, productive citizens. But you can't do that internationally because we have very, very little ability to influence people.
Yeah, and I mean, it's fundamentally about economics, right? If in New Zealand society, maybe we can educate the criminals so that they don't want to knife us anymore. But we can't do that in Eastern Europe. We can't do it in North Korea. Right, there is this natural economic disparity that is going to cause them to victimise us. I mean, the Nigerian 419 scammers, you know, you live very well in Nigeria for a very small amount of money relative that you've scammed out of, you know, what they perceive as being, you know, a fat, rich Westerner. And, you know, it's hard to argue with the economic incentives, right? If you're starving and you want to feed your family and you can do it by ripping someone off on the other side of the world that you've never met, why wouldn't you?
You'll go on a contact centre and say, I'm from Microsoft and you've got a virus on your computer.
Yeah,
I mean, if that's going to bring you the money to feed your children, you will do it. Yeah.
Before we had the digital age, before we were connected to the internet, we only had to deal with the crooks in New Zealand. And I'd say it's 4% of society, so you have about 16,000 crooks in New Zealand. That's a manageable number. But now we have to face every crook in the world to come here. So we actually have we're facing more criminals than actually people living in New Zealand that we have to protect ourselves against.
And we probably have more beagles at the airport that sniff for apples in people's luggage than we do cyber cops, right?
That's true, yeah.
I mean,
There's that lovely cartoon Gary Larson did, I remember, where there was a picture of a dog at a computer. Did anyone ever see that saying, it's great, the internet, because nobody knows I'm a dog? Yeah. Those beagles, though, who knows where they went. Right, final question. Gold coin over there at the back. Lady in pink, thank you.
Know anything about it, so I'm curious. If I'm going to use Password Bank for all my different passwords and I'm storing it in the bank, what's to stop a hacker from hacking the Password Bank and getting all my passwords?
that's a great question.
Great question.
Yeah.
Great question. So there's two places you could run a password store. One is on your computer, and another is on somebody else's computer. And so there are services on the internet where you can go and store your passwords in the cloud, as we call it, in the terminology of the day. And that might not be a great idea for exactly that reason. And there are some systems that that do that in a way that, using certain types of cryptography and lots of fancy math and sort of assertions about the security of the service that you might be able to trust and make a good decision. If you store it on your own computer, running a piece of software, okay, you have to download a piece of software, which is a bad idea, but it's a less bad idea perhaps than using the same password everywhere. And then at least you're reliant on the security of your computer. Now, you're going to type your password into your computer anyway. If someone's compromised your computer, then they can watch you typing in keys and use the camera and whatever else. Like, they've got a fairly complete control. So you can, if you store your password, and actually, frankly, if you took all of your passwords and you put them in a Microsoft Word document and stored them on your desktop, that would probably still be better than having the same password everywhere on every system. And you assume that anyone, your children or your friends who use your computer can read your passwords. Okay, that's a risk you take. But that's a risk that you can manage more effectively than amorphous, someone might hack eBay and steal my password that's the same as my bank. So keeping that control to yourself and keeping that risk manageable for yourself is a thing that we can help with, either in terms of technology or in terms of good advice on how to do it. And honestly, I think the Word doc full of passwords approach is not as awful as you might expect.
Let me tell you what I do.
Yes.
Let me
Tell me what you do.
No, I'm happy to share it. I've got a different password for everything. I can't remember any of them, but I have an algorithm that I use to actually generate the password, and all I have to do is remember the algorithm or the process how I create the password.
Oh, well, that's easy, isn't it? Yeah. Memorising an algorithm.
No. Let me give you an example. Let me give you an example. For example, let's say I'm talking about a password for the B and Z, right? So you take B and Z, that's 3 letters. So I take the first letter and the last letter, which is the B and the Z, as part of the password. And there's 3 letters. Then I use the number 3 behind there, and then something a fixed name that I remember, or a fixed word. And then add all those characters up and add that number at the end. You can make it as simple or as difficult as you want. So you only have to remember, how do I get to the password from the service that I use, plus a number of variables that I create. So if I go to do something, create a password, and I don't go there for 2 years, and then I go back there and I say, what's your username and password? Okay, the username is usually your email address, and then I go, oh, well, this is this service, so I'd use the first letter and the last letter, and it's 6 characters, so there's first letter, last 6, and then a fixed number, and then add all those up, and there's another digit at the end. Perfect. Nobody can find the password, and you don't have to remember any of them. All you have to do is remember how you create them.
Except then when I steal 2 of your passwords and I reverse engineer the scheme and break all the rest of your passwords.
Yeah,
so that scheme has to exhibit certain security properties that
there's always a risk.
The example scheme doesn't.
But you need quite a few to actually to reverse engineer it.
What this discussion is showing is just how complicated managing your identity and authenticating it across multiple online services really is. And I don't think there's actually one perfect solution to it at the moment. You know, some people actually just write them down on a piece of paper and tuck them away really securely somewhere in their house
that's
these
me.
days.
I'll do that.
Password
I've done
123 is pretty popular, isn't it?
Password 123. I mean, don't use your dog's name, you know, that's one of the key
At
things.
least use your budgie's name. Your first budgie.
And another actually useful tip might be when you get asked a security question, what's your mother's maiden name, what's your dog's name, use something completely unrelated to the question as the answer, right? If the question is, what street did you go up on? I go to Lynn's, I download the New Zealand Gazette, I get all of the place names out, I try them all, right? And that works, right? If someone asks you, you know, what's your pet's name? Cheese, right? I mean, pick a word, right? Completely unrelated to the question. Or maybe your pet's name is cheese, if it's a mouse or something, I don't know. But you know, pick something else because you really don't want to give people any hints.
Well, I think that's us. Good luck with your passwords. I can see everyone running home. I'm going to have a go at Martin's algorithm, although memorising the algorithm is going to be a bit of a challenge. I'm going to have to write that down somewhere. I'm not quite sure where in the cloud or on a bit of paper or... But
just don't put it where your webcam can see it.
Yeah, okay.
Then actually use that to read
And
your
put it on
password
a
algorithm off the
post-it
paper.
underneath your
Under the
laptop.
keyboard.
A lot of help.
That's
I know.
really
I'm definitely going to go claim my 2.5 million, I think, tonight.
Yeah.
Hopefully it'll all work out. Hey, thank you all for coming out this evening. Really appreciate it. And again, a big thank you to our panellists and thank you to iPens for organising this. Thank you to Amelia Nurse who produced it, and also Queen Margaret. Thank you very much for having us here. Thank you.